Gabe Marks gone after just incredible production over 3 seasons, 74, 104, and 89 catches with 37 touchdowns. Also, John Thompson, a contributor, gone. River Craycraft, going to be a big miss as well, as he was injured down the stretch last year. Your thoughts about some of the complementary pieces coming around Luke Falk this year?
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver is the big question mark on offense. Obviously, Gabe Marks and River Craycraft, those are the two big names. Both of those guys were awesome. And our fans are pretty quick to point out, we just talked about Falk and the game against Colorado and Washington and Minnesota. Craycraft was out. He had blown out his knee against Cal, missed the rest of the season. A lot of our fans wonder what might have been had he played against those secondaries and maybe been able to beat their man coverage maybe a little more easily and given him another strong target to throw to. But, now we look, okay, well, this year, I mean, Craycraft is gone, injury or not. Gabe Marks, same deal. He's gone. And so the question is, are the young and experienced guys that are going to fill those roles, are they going to be able to fill them well? The left side, the ex-receiver, I've no issues, no question marks, no quandaries about that guy. That's Tavares Martin Jr. He's going to be awesome. He was already really good last year. Falk maybe didn't look his way as much as maybe he could have. But this year, I feel like he's poised for a massive year, and people are maybe not, don't know that name yet, are going to know that name. I feel like he's going to have a massive year from that left outside receiver spot. In the left inside receiver spot, Robert Lewis, he's a guy, he's coming on his 4th year as a starter. He's dependable, he's reliable, he's sort of light, but he's pretty fast and a really excellent blocker for his size. That right inside receiver, which is where Craycraft was, so the whole right side is going to be redone. That right inside receiver, well, that was Craycraft and John Thompson. And so, who's gonna step in there? Kyle Sweet is a guy who, has shown some production for a couple of years, draws comparisons to Craycraft. I think sometimes that's largely because they're both white, but similar skill sets. So he, will get some time in there. There's a 4-star receiver coming in, Jameer Calvin, who we just sort of assume is going to go into that spot. If that's the Y position, go into that spot. It'll be interesting to see how much production they can get out of him right away. And then in terms of the right outside receiver spot, Isaiah Johnson-Mack, a big physical receiver. He was a guy who played pretty extensively last year. Was sort of overwhelmed, I think, by the game early on. Came on strong strong might be too strong, but got better as the year went on. Looked real good in spring practices, so that's a good sign. Another guy, Desmond Patman, is a guy who played last year as a true freshman. Played the first few games, didn't show real well, really didn't play the rest of the year. He looked also great in spring practices. He's another guy with a ton of physical talent. Should be able to step onto the field right away and play really well. And then there's a junior college transfer, Aesop Winston, who comes in, and Luke Falk's already raving about his hands. He's got the best hands of any receiver he's ever thrown to, which is really saying something, considering he was thrown to Craycraft and Gabe Marks, two guys who seem to catch everything who went their way. So, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of optimism that, they'll be able to kind of figure it out and be productive. But, in terms of returning production, it's basically Tavares Martin and some catches from Robert Lewis, and that's really about it. So a lot of question marks, but a lot of optimism that there's talent there. The one mitigating factor, and again, we talked about this on another video, we talked about the running backs. A lot of times, most schools focus on what the running backs do running the ball, and that is a big part of what they do for Wazoo, but they are massively involved in the passing game, far more than any group of running backs have ever been in a Mike Leach offense. They catch a ton of balls. And if they can be as productive as they've been, and maybe even be a little more productive, Keith Harrington is a guy who didn't play really at all last year, kind of plagued by injuries, dropped down the depth chart. He's the number 3 running back 2 years ago. Last year was number 4 with the emergence of James Williams. Well, he's back, looked incredible, as explosive. He's explosive, as explosive as ever in the spring game as Jamal Morrow and Gerard Wicks sat out. Getting him back into the mix can add an element. The passing game out of the backfield is a really, really major weapon for WSU. And so if those guys are able to be utilized the way they've been utilized, and Falk, really doesn't have any issues, throwing it short, that's something that he'll do. Sometimes he kind of gets the reputation for being check down Charlie. if those guys can be as explosive as they've been, that can definitely mitigate some of the inexperience in the receivers.
Talk about check down Charlie. I'm kind of a nerd, Jeff, when it comes to weird statistics. I noticed that one of your running backs averaged like 3.5 yards per reception a couple of years ago. And I'm also going to point to Isaiah Johnson-Mack because he averaged 7 yards per reception as a wide receiver. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, a lot of that had to, a lot of his catches were screens. And so, they run those outside screens, either, tunnel screens or whatever. And so that was where some of that low number came from is, he's catching the ball and sometimes only get, 3 or 4 yards a pop. So yeah, I would look for that number to definitely go up. I think he'll be able to, he's not a burner, but he's definitely physical. He can catch balls in traffic. And I think you'll see that number go up as Falk tends to learn to trust him a little bit, throw it into traffic and trust that he'll be able to go and get a ball, even if maybe there's a guy draped around him.
All right, Jeff Nesser from Coug Center, the SB Nation platform for Washington State Athletics, joining us to break down the wide receivers with the Cougars for 2017. Jeff, we know you got a lot going on. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.